Imagine for a moment that you are sitting quietly in a room, eyes open, listening to the faint hum of the world around you. You feel your body in the chair, your breath moving in and out, and somewhere inside all of that, you sense your own thinking. You assume almost without question that your mind is inside your head. That feels obvious, but pause there. Slow down with me. What if that obvious feeling is wrong? Not wrong in a mystical way, but wrong in a deeper, more disturbing and more useful way. Close your eyes and picture your mind like a little person sitting behind your eyes, watching the world through them like windows. That's how most of us intuitively imagine it. A tiny decision maker inside the skull, evaluating reality, making plans, and pushing buttons that move your body. But ask yourself, have you ever actually seen this mind? Not your brain on a scan, but the thinking self itself. No. You've only ever experienced thoughts, sensations, emotions, and memories. The mind is something you infer from all of that activity. Already, something interesting appears. The mind might not be a thing located in one place. It might be a process spread across your body, your brain, and your interaction with the world. Let's test this with a simple thought experiment. Imagine you wake up one morning and your memory of your entire life has vanished. You still have a functioning brain. You can see, hear, speak, and move, but you have no personal history, no sense of who you are, no goals, no identity. Are you still you? Most people hesitate here because identity suddenly feels fragile. If memory disappears, what remains of the mind we care about? Now take it further. Imagine your brain is intact, but you are completely isolated from the world. No sights, no sounds, no touch, no movement. Scientists have actually done versions of this in sensory deprivation experiments. People start hallucinating, losing track of time, and sometimes losing their sense of self. Their mind begins to unravel without the world feeding it information. So does your mind exist only inside your head? Or does it partially live in your environment? Your relationships, your habits, your language, and your history. Think about how you actually think. When solving a hard problem, you might talk out loud, pace around, draw diagrams, or write notes. Your thinking spills outside your skull. Your mind recruits paper, space, and tools. In that sense, your mind is not just brain activity. It is brain plus world. This leads to an unsettling idea. Your mind is not a fixed object. It is a dynamic system that extends beyond your body. That means something uncomfortable. If your environment shapes your mind, then you are far less independent than you feel. The people you spend time with, the media you consume, and the incentives around you are literally shaping who you are. This is our first uncomfortable truth. Most people believe they think independently, but in reality, they are mostly reacting to their environment without realizing it, the environment without realizing it. They mistake reflex for reasoning. Now consider the brain itself. It is not a perfectly rational machine. It evolved for survival, not truth. It is full of shortcuts, biases, and emotional triggers. It wants safety, status, and short-term comfort more than clarity. So when you think, you are often not calmly analyzing reality. You are negotiating with instincts that evolved for a much harsher world. Picture early humans on a dark savanna. Seeing danger quickly mattered more than being correct. Overreacting saved lives. Underreacting got people killed. That bias is still inside you. That means when markets crash, people panic. Not because they carefully analyzed probabilities, but because their nervous system screams danger. When prices rise, they feel greed, not wisdom. Their mind is being dragged around by ancient wiring. Here's the second uncomfortable truth. Most people lose not because they are stupid, but because they are emotional in situations that punish emotion. Now let's circle back to where the mind exists. Your brain is inside your skull. Yes, but your mind, your patterns of thinking, are also embedded in your habits. If you always check your phone when bored, that habit is part of your mind. If you always avoid difficult conversations, that avoidance is part of your mind. If you always chase what is popular, that tendency lives in your thinking. So the mind is partly biological, partly behavioral, and partly social. Now consider wealthy people, not in terms of what they buy, but how they think. Many imagine that wealth comes from brilliance, luck, or secret knowledge. But if you watch carefully, something simpler appears. Wealth often comes from avoiding obvious stupidity over long periods of time. That is a deep idea. Most people try to be brilliant. A smaller number focus on not being foolish. Think about investing. People obsess over finding the perfect stock, the perfect strategy, the perfect prediction. But many wealthy individuals quietly focus on something boring: patience, consistency, and avoiding catastrophic mistakes. They don't need to be right all the time. They just avoid being disastrously wrong. This connects back to where the mind lives. A disciplined mind is not just inside the brain. It is built into routines, environments, and guardrails that prevent bad behavior. If you know you panic in a crisis, you might design rules that stop you from making decisions in emotional moments. You are shaping your mind through structure. Here is the third uncomfortable truth. Intelligence alone does not make you successful. Patience often matters more. Highly intelligent people can still destroy themselves if they are impulsive, arrogant, or emotionally reactive. Meanwhile, moderately smart people who are steady and disciplined can quietly win over decades. Now let's ask a deeper question. If your mind is shaped by environment, habits, and biology, how much control do you really have? The honest answer is uncomfortable. You have some control, but not absolute control. You are not a free-floating rational ghost inside a machine. You are a creature embedded in systems that influence you constantly. But that does not mean you are helpless. It means wisdom is about choosing your environment wisely. If you want a calmer mind, you don't just decide to be calm. You reduce noise, limit distractions, and surround yourself with steady people. You design your life so your better self has the dentines. Now let's test this idea with a real-life situation. Imagine two people who both want to be healthier. The first person says, "I will rely on my willpower." They keep junk food at home, stay up late scrolling, and trust themselves to resist temptation. The second person changes their environment. They remove junk food, set their phone to shut off at night, and keep running shoes by the door. Which person succeeds more often? Almost always the second. Their mind did not magically become stronger. They reshaped the conditions around it. So where does the mind exist? It exists partly in choices like that. Now let's take this to a more philosophical level. When you make a decision, it feels like you choosing, but that decision is influenced by your past experiences, your current mood, your beliefs, and your surroundings. In a sense, the mind is distributed across time, your past shaping your present. If you had grown up in a different country with different parents, speaking a different language, would you still think the same? Almost certainly not. So you are not just inside your head. You are a part of history. This leads to a final uncomfortable truth. Much of what you consider your personal identity is not chosen. It is inherited, absorbed, or conditioned. That can feel unsettling, but it is also liberating. If parts of your mind were shaped, they can be reshaped. Now let's return to that quiet room at the beginning. You are still sitting there breathing, thinking. But now your mind feels less like a little person in your skull and more like a living process flowing through your brain, body, and world. When you learn something, your mind expands into new ideas. When you change habits, your mind shifts shape. When you surround yourself with wiser people, your thinking improves. The disturbing discovery is this: your mind is not where you thought it was, and it is not as solid as you assumed. It is more fragile, more influenced, and more spread out than most people realize. But the hopeful discovery is this: because the mind is shaped by environment and habits, you can shape it indirectly by shaping your life. Not through willpower alone, but through thoughtful design. At the end of the day, the real question is not just where does your mind exist. It is what kind of mind are you building through your daily choices? Are you feeding it chaos or clarity, noise or depth, reaction or reflection? Most people rush through life assuming their mind is fixed and private. A smaller number realize that thinking is a craft, shaped slowly over time. If there is one takeaway to sit with, let it be this: your mind is not just in your head. It lives in your habits, your environment, your relationships, and your long-term patterns. And that means becoming wiser is less about sudden insight and more about patient, steady alignment with reality. So the next time you feel a thought arise, don't just ask, what do I think? Ask, where did this thought come from? What shaped it? And is that shaping worth keeping? That simple pause is where real thinking begins. Let's go a layer deeper now, because the question of where your mind exists begins to brush against something even stranger: the question of whether you are truly in control of it. When you decide to stand up, you feel as if a conscious command traveled from you to your muscles. But neuroscience suggests something more complicated. Electrical activity in the brain often begins before you become aware of deciding. In other words, the body starts moving, and only afterward does your conscious mind say, yes, I meant to do that. Sit with that for a moment. It is unsettling. It implies that what you call you, the narrator in your head, may not be the primary driver of your actions. It might be more like a storyteller, explaining choices that were already set in motion by deeper processes beneath awareness. If that is true, then where does your mind really sit? Is it in that storyteller voice, or in the unconscious machinery that actually runs your life? Imagine you are driving a car on a familiar route. You arrive at your destination with almost no memory of the drive. Your body handle turns, brakes, and signals automatically. Was your mind absent, or was it operating in a different mode? Most people assume mind equals conscious thought, but much of what makes you, your temperament, instincts, and reactions, operates below the surface. This is where many people make a quiet but serious mistake about success. They believe that better thinking means smarter thinking in the moment, sharper arguments, faster analysis, clever strategies, but in reality, better thinking often means better defaults. Your defaults are what you do automatically when you are tired, stressed, scared, or excited. They are the deeper layers of your mind in action. If your default is panic, you will lose in crises. If your default is patience, you will survive them. If your default is comparison, you will feel poor even when you are wealthy. If your default is gratitude, you will feel rich even with little. So again, where does your mind exist? Partly in your automatic pattern. Now let's connect this to how wealth actually emerges. Most people imagine that successful investors are constantly calculating like human computers, analyzing data every second. But watch carefully and you'll see something different. The best thinkers often do very little, very slowly. They wait. They observe. They decline most opportunities. They avoid excitement. This looks passive from the outside, but internally, it is deeply disciplined. Their mind is trained to resist the emotional pull of the crowd. Here is another uncomfortable truth in a complex world. The person who does less often wins more. Why? Because every action carries risk, cost, and unintended consequences. The more you react, the more chances you give yourself to be wrong. Most people lose because they are too busy proving they are smart. A few people win because they are obsessed with not being foolish. That connects directly to where the mind lives. A reactive mind lives in the moment. A disciplined mind lives in long-term patterns. Now consider incentives, one of the most powerful but invisible forces shaping the mind. If you are paid to talk, you will talk too much. If you are rewarded for risk, you will take reckless risks. If you are praised for confidence, you will pretend to know things you don't.
If you are punished for honesty, you will learn to lie.
Your mind adapts to the system around it. You don't just think in isolation, you think inside an incentive structure. This means your mind is partly embedded in institutions, workplaces, and cultures. Imagine two identical people placed in two different jobs. In one job, you are rewarded for speed and aggression. Over time, your mind becomes impulsive. In the other job, you are rewarded for accuracy and patience. Over time, your mind becomes careful. Same brain, different mind. So if you want to understand where your mind exists, you must look beyond the skull to the world shaping it. Now let's return to something personal. Think about a moment when you were deeply angry. Your heart raced, your muscles tightened, your thoughts narrowed. In that state, your mind felt very different than when you are calm. Was that anger located in your brain alone, or in your body, your hormones, your posture, and your environment? The truth is that your mind and body are not separate. They are one system. Stress in the body creates stress in the mind. Calm in the body creates clarity in thinking. That means your mind lives partly in your breath, your sleep, your nutrition, and your physical state. If you are sleep deprived, you will make worse decisions, not because you became stupid, but because your mind has a different shape in that condition. Now let's ask a sharp question. If your mind depends so much on conditions, how much of what you believe is actually rational? Probably less than you think. We like to imagine that our beliefs come from careful reasoning. In reality, many come from identity, belonging, and emotion. You believe certain things because your friends believe them, your culture rewards them, or your ego prefers them. This is another uncomfortable truth. Most people don't seek truth. They seek comfort or status. That does not mean people are evil. It means they are human. And being human means being influenced more than you realize. So what does wisdom look like in this world? Not heroic genius, not brilliant predictions. Instead, wisdom looks like humility. Humility means knowing the limits of your mind, knowing that you are biased, reactive, and shaped by forces you cannot fully see. Wise people do not assume they are objective. They assume they are flawed and build systems to protect themselves from those flaws. They use checklists. They slow down decisions. They avoid situations that trigger their worst instincts. They spend time with people who challenge them respectfully. In other words, they treat the mind not as a pure tool, but as a fragile instrument that needs careful tuning. Now, if the mind is distributed across brain, body, habits, and environment, then learning becomes more interesting. Learning is not just filling your head with facts. It is rewiring patterns of attention, reaction, and behavior. When you truly learn something, you don't just know it, you see the world differently. For example, once you deeply understand incentives, you start noticing them everywhere. In politics, relationships, business, and even your own life, your mind shifts shape. Once you understand opportunity cost, that every choice means giving up something else, you stop making decisions casually. Your mind becomes more serious. Once you grasp long-term thinking, you stop chasing quick wins and start playing a different game entirely. This is why knowledge changes who you are. It doesn't just sit in your brain. It reshapes your entire mental ecosystem. Now let's return to the original unsettling question. Where does your mind actually exist? If you look only inside your skull, you will miss most of it. If you look only at your environment, you will miss your inner world. If you look only at your habits, you will miss your biology. The mind exists in the relationship between all of these. It is a living process that flows through you and beyond you. And that leads to a final reflective idea. If your mind is shaped by your life, then your life is in a very real sense a sculpting project. Every day you are shaping your future mind, for better or worse. The books you read, the people you spend time with, the media you consume, the habits you practice, the incentives you accept, all of them are quietly carving your thinking. Most people drift through this process unconsciously. A smaller number treat it as intentional. They ask, what kind of mind do I want in 10 years? Do I want a reactive, anxious, distracted mind? Or a calm, patient, clear one? Do I want a mind that chases attention? Or a mind that values depth? Do I want a mind that panics in uncertainty? Or one that can sit with it? These are not abstract questions. They are practical design choices. So perhaps the most disturbing and empowering discovery is this. Your mind is not a static object you are stuck with. It is something you are constantly becoming. And it does not live only in your head. It lives in your choices, your surroundings, and your way of moving through the world. When you understand that, the goal of life shifts slightly. It is no longer just about winning, earning, or achieving. It becomes about cultivating a mind that can navigate reality with clarity, patience, and humility. In the end, the question, where does your mind exist, leads to a deeper one. What kind of mind are you creating? And that, quietly, is one of the most important questions any person can ask. Let's carry this further, because once you see the mind as something larger than your brain, Your sense of responsibility changes in a subtle but profound way. Most people talk about responsibility as if it only applies to big decisions, career choices, relationships, investments, moral dilemmas. But if your mind is shaped continuously by your environment, then responsibility becomes much more ordinary and constant. It shows up in tiny choices you make every day, often without noticing. Consider what you allow into your attention. Every video you watch, every argument you scroll through, every headline that triggers you is not just entertainment. It is quietly training your mind. You are not simply consuming content. You are practicing ways of thinking. If you spend hours in outrage, your mind becomes sharper at anger and worse at calm reasoning. If you spend hours comparing yourself to others, your mind becomes expert at envy and poor at gratitude. If you spend hours on shallow stimulation, your mind becomes restless and loses its capacity for deep focus. None of this happens because you consciously decided to become this way. It happens because the mind adapts to whatever it is repeatedly exposed to. So the real question becomes, what kind of thinking are you rehearsing? This leads to a quiet but serious insight about freedom. People often say, I want freedom. They mean financial freedom, time freedom, or the ability to do whatever they want. But very few people ask whether their mind is actually free. If your thoughts are constantly hijacked by fear, desire, comparison, or distraction, then you are not free. Even if you are wealthy or powerful, you are being pulled around by forces you do not control. True freedom begins inside the mind, and that kind of freedom is rare. Now let's bring this back to success and wealth, because this is where many illusions collapse. Most people imagine that becoming wealthy will make them calm, secure, and mentally free. But if their mind is still anxious, reactive, and comparison-driven, wealth often amplifies their problems instead of solving them. A restless mind with money simply finds more expensive ways to be restless. A fearful mind with wealth finds more things to be afraid of losing. A status-hungry mind with success just raises the bar for what feels like enough. So wealth does not fix the mind. In many cases, it exposes it. Here is another uncomfortable truth. The quality of your mind matters more than the size of your bank account. That sounds like a cliche, but think about it seriously. A calm, clear, patient person with modest resources can live a meaningful, steady, and dignified life. A rich person with a chaotic mind can live in constant stress, insecurity, and dissatisfaction. This is why the deepest form of success is psychological, not financial. Now let's return to the question of where the mind exists, but from a different angle. Imagine your closest friend. You probably understand their personality, their habits, their emotional patterns. In some sense, their mind exists in your perception of them. You carry a version of them inside your own thinking. Likewise, other people carry versions of you in their minds. Your reputation, your character, your influence, all of this exists partly outside your body. So your mind is not just internal. It is distributed across social relationships. If you are kind, people expect kindness from you. If you are unreliable, people expect unreliability. Their expectations then influence how they treat you, which in turn shapes how you behave. Your identity becomes a loop between inner tendencies and outer reactions. Now think about language. The words you use shape how you think. If your language is crude, your thinking tends to be crude. If your language is precise, your thinking becomes more careful. In that sense, your mind lives partly in your vocabulary. Children raised in environments with rich language develop different mental abilities than children raised with limited speech. Their minds are shaped long before they consciously understand what is happening. So again, the mind is not just inside the skull. It is woven into culture, communication, and shared meaning. Now let's ask a harder question. If so much of your mind is shaped by forces outside your control, childhood, culture, biology, environment, how fair is it to judge people? This is where things become uncomfortable, but humane. That becomes clear that many people are not simply bad or stupid. They are often products of systems that shape them poorly. Their minds were trained in ways that make good decisions difficult. That does not remove responsibility, but it changes how we understand it. Responsibility becomes less about blame and more about awareness and correction. You cannot change your past, but you can change the conditions shaping your future mind. Now let's bring in patience, because it is central to everything we've been discussing. Patience is not just waiting. It is a way of structuring the mind so it does not panic in uncertainty. Most people fail because they cannot tolerate not knowing. They rush into decisions, chase trends, or react emotionally. Their mind demands immediate clarity, and reality rarely provides it. The patient mind can sit in ambiguity without breaking. But patience is not natural for most people. It has to be cultivated through habit, reflection, and sometimes through painful experience. Again, this shows that the mind is something you build, not something you simply possess. Now imagine two versions of you 10 years in the future. In one version, you spent the next decade constantly reacting, chasing trends, arguing online, consuming shallow content, making impulsive decisions. Your mind is sharper in some ways, but more anxious, scattered, and brittle. In the other version, you spent the decade reading deeply, thinking slowly, building steady habits, and surrounding yourself with thoughtful people. Your mind is calmer, clearer, and more resilient. Same person, very different minds. Which one you become depends less on talent and more on the daily environment you allow yourself to inhabit. Now let's return to the disturbing aspect of all this. If your mind is shaped so much by forces around you, then the feeling that I am fully in control of my thinking is an illusion. You are not a detached observer of reality. You are embedded in it, shaped by it, and constantly influenced by it. But here is the paradox. Recognizing this does not make you weaker. It actually gives you more power. Once you accept that your mind is vulnerable to influence, you can begin to choose those influences more wisely. You can design your life so your better self has the advantage instead of constantly fighting your own instincts. Now let's slow down and reflect. At the beginning, the question was simple. Where does your mind exist? Most people would have answered inside my head. But now, if you take everything we've explored seriously, that answer feels incomplete. Your mind exists in your brain, yes, but also in your body, your habits, your environment, your relationships, your culture, your language, your past, and your future choices. It is not a static thing, but a living process. And that means understanding yourself is not just introspection. It is also looking outward at the world shaping you. Now imagine standing in front of a mirror. You see your body, but you do not see your mind. Yet your mind is just as real as your physical reflection, maybe more so. But unlike your body, your mind does not have clear boundaries. It bleeds into everything around you. In that sense, asking where does my mind end and the world begin becomes a difficult question with no sharp answer. Your mind is both inside you and outside you at the same time. Now let's bring this back to everyday life in a practical way. The next time you feel angry, instead of just saying, I am angry, you might ask, what conditions created this anger? Lack of sleep, stress, social pressure, a misleading incentive, a past memory? The next time you feel afraid, instead of assuming your fear is purely rational, you might ask, is this my ancient survival wiring reacting? Or is this truly a modern threat? The next time you feel certain about something, you might ask, is this certainty based on evidence, or is it protecting my ego? These questions do not make life easier in the short term. In fact, they can make it more uncomfortable, but over time they make your mind stronger, clearer, and more honest. Now let's end with a reflective thought. Most people search their entire lives for meaning, purpose, or success, assuming it is something external, a career, a status, a relationship, or a legacy. But if you take seriously the idea that your mind is the central tool through which you experience reality, then cultivating a wise mind becomes the deepest form of achievement, because whatever you gain in the world, you will experience it through your mind. A chaotic mind turns success into anxiety. A calm mind turns modest circumstances into peace. So, perhaps the most important project of your life is not what you build in the world, but what kind of mind you build inside and around yourself. And that brings us full circle. Your mind does not simply sit behind your eyes. It is a living system flowing through your brain, body, habits, relationships, and environment. It is fragile, powerful, and constantly changing. The disturbing discovery is that you are not as independent in your thinking as you feel. The hopeful discovery is that you have more influence over your future mind than you realize. In the end, wisdom is not about finding some hidden truth locked inside your skull. It is about learning to shape the conditions that shape you. And if there is one final question worth carrying with you, let it be this. If your mind is being formed every day by the life you live, what kind of mind are you quietly building? And is that what you truly want?